But that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is the anxiety of having a new experience is all that same piece of I don't trust future self in case anxiety comes back. And I don't know how much that comes with, like, look at my positive affirmations and I'm saying these things. It comes through doing something that's really brave, which usually means, wow, I'm going to show up authentically with people. And instead of going, everything's great, it's wonderful, or oh my goodness, it's awful, you know what? Let me stop and think about how I'm doing. Yeah, today's been kind of a tough day, but I'm figuring it out.
Welcome to Counselor Off the Clock. I am Lydia Thompson, your host and a licensed counselor. On this episode, we are diving into a topic that affects so many of us, anxiety. As we navigate the end of this year and prepare for the next, the expectations, the reflections, the transitions can bring a noticeable spike in stress and worry. Here's the thing, anxiety isn't something to dread. In fact, it's not always bad. It's something we can understand, manage, and learn from. So to help us unpack this, I'm so excited to have Amy from Arcadian Therapeutic Services. She's a marriage and family therapist and a psychiatric nurse practitioner. She brings a wealth of knowledge to this conversation. My aim is to make mental health conversations more accessible and to keep you company while you grow. If you're loving this podcast, subscribe, give us a rating. I hope you can get comfortable because we are off the clock. Well, welcome, Amy, to the podcast. Now, for our listeners, it's been a little bit since we have had a release of an episode. There's just been some circumstances that have come up. And so I'm really grateful that even during the holiday season, we could have you on the podcast. I think this is really relevant and really important whenever, but also during the holidays, this tends to spike. Our topic today is anxiety, and I'm really excited about where we can go today with this.
Yes, me too, especially since I'm actually a little anxious right now. So it's going to be perfect to be talking about it and also experiencing it.
Tell me how you know that you're anxious.
Oh, we're jumping right into that one. So I spent most of my life not thinking I was an anxious person, and only in the last few years did I finally recognize what anxiety felt like in my body. So for some people, it's overthinking and just spinning. For some people, it is their heart beating really fast or feeling like it's hard to breathe. For me, it's this heaviness that shows up in my chest, and I go, oh, and when I finally learned to listen to it and name it as anxiety, it helps so much instead of just trying to ignore this feeling and pretend it wasn't there.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. So many things get blamed as, I just get nervous or whatever it is. And really, it's anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has anxiety.
Everybody has anxiety, and we don't have to be afraid of it. I think that's ultimately what I want to tell people is anxiety, we're supposed to have a little bit of it. Let's learn how to keep some control over it, but we need a little bit of it in order to survive.
Yeah. So you are the owner of Arcadian Therapeutic Services, and y'all do all sorts of things. And you're an MFT, a marriage and family therapist, and a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So you do kind of the therapy side of things as well as the medication management. So anxiety shows up a lot in your work.
I work with kids 2.5, 3 years old, all the way up through adulthood. And pretty consistently, there's that message of, wow, things have to be perfect. It has to stay in my control. I'm worried about the future. I'm not sure what's going to happen. This is taking over my life. It shows up a little different for a 3 or a 4-year-old than maybe a 30-year-old, but it's still that feeling that says this is not okay. And it's just awful. How do I make this go away?
Yeah. So why is this topic important to you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you chose this topic.
I chose this topic. Maybe it was me trying to lean into something that I'm learning to become more comfortable with. Right now, it's important. And I tell this to all my clients, like, we have to figure out what's driving the anxiety. And yes, there may be specific things that have happened in your life that we can name as trauma because of how it affected you and it has changed your behavior and changed how you experience the world. There's also this experience of anxiety that shows up that's trying to protect us. And when we start to get underneath that, the question I ask is, okay, are you bored right now? Or are you lonely right now? And this time of the year is so difficult because there's a lot going on, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not bored. It may just mean that we're busy. And this time of the year has such high expectations for connection and family time and parties. And it's supposed to be so fun and amazing. And
it's supposed to be the most magical time of the year. It's the best time of the year.
Thank you, Elf. It's not necessarily. And then we go into faking it and pretending, which increases our sense of loneliness, which ultimately starts to have higher anxiety at times. And that's kind of a blanket thing. Obviously, there can be other things going on, but that's what I see drives it a lot right now.
Yeah. So it's important in the work that both of us do is to find the root of anxiety. Yeah. So for you, you notice boredom and loneliness being some of the roots of anxiety.
At least a place to start.
Definitely a place to start. So you work with all sorts of ages, but our listeners are not going to be 3 years old, 4 years old. For our listeners, can you actually define anxiety?
I'm going to give you my definition of anxiety.
That's why I asked you.
Which is that I am not trusting my future self to be able to handle something. And like I said, that's kind of general. If we stop and think about it, right, I am worried about this thing that's coming up, or I'm not sure what's going to happen. And it's me not trusting that I can actually do it. And when we use that as our frame of reference, it can help slow things down and go, yeah, that might be it. So anxiety is more concern about the future, things that may or may not be in our control, that we don't know the outcome, and ultimately how it will impact us and other people. It can be physiological, right? It can be your body and how that feels. And it can be an emotional, mental state. But my simple definition is like, we're thinking about the future and I don't trust myself to be able to handle it. What's your definition?
I think anxiety is difficult to define because it's an experience. And so when we think about anxiety, especially in terms of anxiety disorders, we have a checklist of items that we're looking for. And many people experience every single one of those check marks, maybe even on a monthly basis. That doesn't mean that they meet the definition for an anxiety disorder. And so an anxiety, I would say, just like you said, is a future orientation where your body is not in your seat, your feet are not on the floor, your mind and your body are taken to the future to try to fix something that's coming, to anticipate and go ahead and get that done now. So I think we have similar definitions. So I would love to get into how would somebody know that they have just normal anxiety or they have an anxiety disorder?
I hate to use the clinical stuff, right? Because that checklist that you talked about doesn't actually let a person have their own experience of it. And an anxiety disorder is going to be, it's causing dysfunction more days than not, or more hours than not. And it's getting in the way of family, friends, work, school, whatever that is. And it's not able to be controlled, right? Yes, there's other ways to do that because you can go on the internet and you can look this up and say, oh, I have all these things. All of the things that we have for disorders are normal human conditions. It just became maladaptive. It became something that was too much. And so one day of anxiety, let's say being concerned about going and doing a podcast, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a disorder. It's when it becomes something that's pervasive, meaning it's in most of your life, not just in single episodes.
Yeah. We were talking about this beforehand, but, we pull from this big old book, the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and people just made it up. They decided where the line was for what is normal anxiety and what is an anxiety disorder. And so it is up to us and our clinical judgment to help people cope with whatever is there, whether they meet the criteria for a diagnosis or not, because anxiety is real when somebody's sitting in my office, that anxiety is real. I don't care if you meet the diagnosis code. Luckily, I have the privilege of not caring about that diagnostic code. And I get to treat what's in front of me. And most of the population that I'm seeing, which are teenagers and young adults, have anxiety. It is pervasive in our culture right now. Can you speak to that, what you're seeing in teens and young adults that is causing more anxiety in the people that we're working with?
Did you actually ask me to figure out what is going on in the world
What
and
is
then
going on in the world?
find out how we're going to do something about it and
Yeah.
give all the reasons for it? Yeah, I can't do that.
Here's the thing.
Thank you,
It's
though.
like, no duh. Like, let's just even if we throw out a few options of some things that are going on in the world, it's like, no duh, these people have anxiety.
Right.
No duh.
And I would go back to, we're supposed to have it, right? Like, if a lion comes into this room right now,
Yeah.
I need my amygdala, which is the part of my brain that helps to keep me safe, to go, that's danger, that's a threat, we need to do something. And so often people say, I don't want to have any anxiety at all. Well, we need it a little bit. Also,
Yeah.
if a lion shows up right now, it's not going to be good. What are we going to do? Throw our water at the lion? So that idea of like, oh, I have anxiety. Yeah. Okay. Is the anxiety realistic? Is the anxiety something that's getting in the way? Is the anxiety something that has become a pattern of thinking? And so now it just automatically happens. And so, no, we're not really in touch with what's really going on because we're just so used to feeling this way. I'm going back to bored and lonely, though, right? And most of the people who come into my office say, I don't really feel like I have a lot of close friends who see me and get me, and I feel safe being myself, and I know that if I make a mistake, I'm not going to get rejected. So I see so much of that, with or without anxiety, but usually with the anxiety, there's that part that goes, I don't know, I feel like I have to perform, or I have to pretend, or I'm not sure what's going to happen in relationships if I don't show up this way. And then I guess most of my teenagers don't really find school to be this super amazing, enjoyable thing. There can be parts of it that they like, but it's not really the go-to of like, wow, how do I want to spend my day? Sitting here and having information put in my head that I'm not quite sure how I'm going to use it in the future. So then they don't have a lot of time to do the things that just bring life and connection and joy, because homework, maybe some more homework.
Yeah.
And then homework.
How does technology play into anxiety?
Wow. That's like the $4 billion question that I think Apple and all the apps have started to figure out how to get into that, right?
I know. Well, I asked the question because I actually had a client that went to their pediatrician and they filled out the questionnaire for mental health stuff, for depression, anxiety, to screen. And they came up high on anxiety. And their older male white doctor said, you just need to get off your phone. And this person actually has anxiety. And I was really frustrated. But I hear that commonly, especially among the older generations, that technology is causing anxiety. And I think there is something to be said about that. And it is not the only thing that is at play here. So how do you see technology playing into anxiety?
Wow. It's so tricky because to a certain extent, I kind of agree with the doctor that says that's not helpful, right? Sitting there and like being focused on this is going to keep the reminder of all the things that may need to be done, right? Or keep the reminder of just the to-do list, the people, the disconnection because you're scrolling, right? So it's a good reminder of that, but it's also part of our world right now. And so to say don't be on technology is also saying don't function in our current environment. So I think the question is it helping or hurting? And that's ultimately what we have to decide. And when you are feeling anxious and you go to your phone to start scrolling, right, that's kind of a form of avoidance, right? I'm trying to either find a way to connect with others by seeing what's going on, or I'm trying to deal with my boredom by distracting myself. Is that good or bad? I don't know. It depends on the situation. And honestly, like if there's other options, I don't think it's necessarily the problem. I just don't know if it's helping.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But we can't get rid of it.
It's a part of everyday life. And so to say, just stop being on your phone and you won't have anxiety, I think invalidates people's anxiety.
Which still goes down to like what is driving it, right?
Then what is driving it?
The phone is not driving it. Something else is going on. Yep.
Yeah. And often my teenagers and even my adults will go to their phones. Like currently, right now, I go to my phone for my connection. I've got a little kid, and so sometimes I don't see my friends, but my friends are going to be on my phone. Yeah. My group chats, all my mom friends, they're blowing up all day, every day. And it's my connection. And it keeps me not as bored. I do work on my phone or whatever it is. I think what I relate to and what I see is never being able to be off.
Oh, yes.
That when you're constantly on and not giving your brain a chance to slow down and be present oriented, I mean, we can get into solutions here, but when we don't give our brains a chance to be present-oriented and just stuck in future orientation or the busyness of our phones, I think it can exacerbate anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm hearing, and so I'm going to shift it a little bit. Like, we're talking about anxiety like it's bad, right? Because people come into my office and they're like, I hate my anxiety, right? I need it to go away. It's causing problems. And is it IFS? I don't know what theory I'm going to talk about right now. To a certain extent, we need to make friends with our anxiety, right? Let me get to know you. Let me figure out how you're trying to help me. Let me figure out what your message you're sending. Because anxiety can also kind of be like the 2-year-old who's trying to get attention. And we can keep trying to ignore. And then 2-year-old gets louder and louder and louder and bigger and bigger and bigger, which then leads us to we have an anxiety disorder because it's causing dysfunction. How do we make friends with it? Which sounds so weird.
It doesn't. So honestly, it reminds me of the new Inside Out movie.
Yes.
Where I think when you can find compassion for that piece that says I love it when she says, I was just trying to help.
Yes.
And I even get chills now. Like that's the piece of us that is really trying to help.
Anxiety is doing its best to help us. And I talk about it like it's its own entity, which it kind of is if we can think about it like that. It is trying to help, and it's trying so much to protect us and to like make sure that things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
Talking about it like it's this thing to be like, oh, okay, how do I get rid of this? I hate it. We're kind of saying I hate a part of myself, which ultimately isn't going to help our mental health.
Yeah. So there's like an acceptance. I heard when you were talking about your anxiety that you pay attention to it. And I think that is important. Weirdly, in making it quieter.
Yes.
Is just listen. Just pay attention. Just ask that part what it needs. Label it. Give it some words.
Yep.
And actually that decreases, I would say, the power it has, moving it out of the driver's seat.
Yes.
Just give it a voice.
Basically, we need all the characters of Inside Out here, and they can all have their voices, and this would be the best podcast ever.
Oh my gosh, amazing.
Like if we can make friends with our anxiety, so now it's not an enemy, but it's something that's trying to help us, we can then turn into what does it need, right? How do I pay attention to you enough that you can slow down and you don't have to be as loud or as intense because you know that I'm not going to try to ignore you.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said of wanting to lessen or give less power to our anxiety if we can give it a place. And so when people come in your office, what are some avenues you take with them to, I don't know, give the accurate space for anxiety without it having to take over their entire life and be maladaptive.
Mm-hmm. So the first one, and I would say this to probably anyone, is follow the train, right?
Mhm.
So anxiety, and I'm going to use today, right?
Yep.
I was feeling anxious, recognizing like, oh, wow, I've never done a podcast before. I have no idea what to expect, all of those things. So let's follow the train. So what's the worst case or second worst case scenario? I say things that I go, that didn't come out as clearly. Okay, what happens if then? Well, then obviously I am not going to be a good therapist. And then if I'm not a good therapist, then I'm not going to have any money and I can't pay my bills. And then I'm going to be homeless. And at some point, it turns into, that may not be realistic, right?
Yeah.
So let me give some space for it to just flesh out into what is the actual fear here. And at this moment, I'm not actually afraid that I'm going to be homeless, which then helps to say, oh, okay, it can have a little bit. It doesn't have to feel this big. We can have a little bit. It doesn't have to be, this changes everything about my life. So first one is follow the train, right?
Yeah.
Let's go. What's the worst case, or what happens next? What does this mean about me if this is true? Until we get to something that either tells us, hey, this is what's driving it, or that may not be that realistic.
Well, when I track my anxiety and it gets to homelessness, I'm like, that's a threat. No wonder you're anxious.
Absolutely.
Is that threat realistic?
Right.
Not really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you're risking homelessness by being on this podcast.
I hope not.
Let us know in the comments.
Yep, I hope not.
But I think there is, okay, I might say something wrong. Okay.
And then what happens? What does that mean?
Happens? What does that mean about you
Yep.
if you say something wrong? Yeah. I mean, I think there is a part that is a little anxiety producing, but probably doesn't, the homelessness is this big. And the, I might say something wrong is these big. For all of our audio listeners here, I had my hands big and then small. And I think when I'm looking for quote unquote normal / abnormal anxiety levels, I'm looking at, does this fit the situation? And for you to have anxiety on a podcast that you've never done before, that fits. For you to be scared about homelessness, right? It doesn't fit. Maybe your reaction doesn't fit. And so having your emotional reaction fit, I think is adaptive. It is normal. And we can also validate when it is huge and it doesn't fit. I think those are moments for pause and to do more investigation. When, my anxiety doesn't quite fit this scenario. Let me dig in. I must be buying into some thought that is not realistic.
And you just said it, which is validation, right? And so usually with anxiety, we are like, oh, that doesn't make sense. It's not true. Don't worry about it, which basically says, hey, don't pay attention to it. And then, of course, it has to get louder or bigger or more intense with how your body's feeling. When you say, yeah, your feelings make sense. Oh, okay, so I don't have to run from that anxiety anymore. The feeling makes sense. It doesn't mean I have to act off of that. But now I'm not trying to fight and validate, listen, this is important.
Right.
Oh, yeah, okay, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And now what are we going to do?
Yeah, I know. I noticed that with some of my clients, they'll use the just shut up to their anxiety. And I'm like, if somebody said that to a part of you, that wouldn't feel good. What is the worst thing if we give it some space to speak? I don't know how you feel about CBT. I think there's some really good aspects. I might cut all of this. Part of it
Yes,
is...
I love seeing where you're going with this one.
Part of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of people do it, and it does work for some people in some circumstances. However, with people with high anxiety, I call it gaslighting yourself.
Okay, keep going.
Okay, so somebody comes in and they have this negative cognition or a negative thought, which, I don't know, give me an example of a negative thought.
Let's do the podcast because it's the easiest one because it's in the moment right now. So a negative thought would be I don't have anything to share. So like,
Yeah,
this is kind of pointless. I don't have anything to share.
This is pointless. I don't have anything to share. CBT says, I want you to prove that wrong, right? Come up with the opposite thought.
Yep.
And think that. And it's like...
You just summed up CBT.
It's like just gaslighting. And this is like my main complaint is how often have you tried to think the opposite thought? You're walking in here going, oh, I have a lot to share. I'm going to do fine. And there's a piece of you going, but what if? But what if? You're not prepared enough. You're going to humiliate yourself. You're going to show yourself to be not professional enough.
Don't forget, I'll be homeless too.
And you're going to be homeless on top of that. Well, just don't think that. Think something else. And that often doesn't work with people with anxiety and high anxiety. I think in my experience, people can have opinions, but in my experience, actually holding space and validating where that piece of us is coming from does way more for self-compassion and moving through anxiety than gaslighting.
I have a tiny bit different view.
Yeah, please share.
I hear the gaslighting part, which is I'm going to say something that may not feel as true and I'm supposed to believe it. And what is that? Cognitive dissonance, right? We have one evidence for this and we're trying to say something else.
Yeah.
Like right now, it looks nice outside. It's actually 30 degrees. It is not what I would call nice. So there's two things that are kind of opposite that I'm trying to be believing. So the gaslighting piece I hear, and I see the benefit of challenging those thoughts when we are regulated.
Yeah.
So in the moment of like, hey, my brain's online, I got enough sleep, I've had something to eat and drink, like all of my basic needs are taken care of, I can stop and think and challenge that and to go, wow, I'm not going to be homeless, right? I can stop and say, I have something to offer, or I can do the best I can, right? We can find that helpful thought in it.
Yeah.
The time I don't think it's as helpful is when we're in the midst of it, because we're asking our brain to do this awesome, like, executive functioning thinking, which is cause and effect and being able to put pieces together and to synthesize information in ways that are helpful when our brain is in fight or flight, like I'm freaking out mode. And that's just not realistic. So I see a place for, hey, stop that thought. Let's see if there's actually evidence, right? Yep. Is this fully true or just partially when in a state of things are okay, right? Like kind of preempting, let me stop. Let me challenge my thoughts. This is what we do when you're going into a test for like in school, right? Like, okay, I studied. I got this. Like I've done this before. In the midst of the test, no, stop and breathe. Do some of the coping skills for your body. Yeah. The stop and think something different isn't something your brain can even access. So that's where I see may not be the best in the moment, has a place.
Yeah. I think it takes a lot of time and effort. And I think this is where I get the rub is rewiring your brain paths and what you believe about yourself and what you fear takes time. And so to just stop it or just shut up and just think something else is like the worst advice. Especially when we're in an activated state. And so to hold space for ourselves until we're regulated, holds and validate until we can work on that rewiring process. Yeah. So thank you for bringing me back to earth. Maybe my views are actually not that extreme. But I do think there is a time and a place for rewiring, and there's a time and a place for holding space for our anxiety.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. We're on the same page with a lot of stuff. We kind of get there differently, but I think we end up doing a lot of the same stuff with our clients, which is like your feelings are valid, right? Let's help you so that they aren't as intense so that you can manage them and learn that they're not a threat.
Yep.
The way that we get there is going to be individual for the person that's sitting in the office. And so some people may need movement, or they may need creativity, or they may need just that sense of connection to say, I'm not alone in this. And other people may need, like, give me the practical things to stop and think, I can practice that. Everybody's wired a little differently.
Yeah. This might be helpful for somebody out there. It may not. I mean, I was experiencing anxiety last night. I didn't get a lot of sleep with my child. And my brain at night tends to be very anxious.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that from my clients too, that it's like when the sun goes down, I don't know, something happens within my brain chemistry. Maybe you can tell me what it is.
Maybe you're tired.
Maybe I'm tired. Well, and that's kind of what I'm able to do in the middle of the night, because my brain will start going down this trail of worst case scenarios or worrying or tension. And I'm able to say to myself, you are not in the headspace to figure that out right now. Just be here. That'll be for tomorrow. Just, you can trust that you can figure it out tomorrow.
Yes.
I mean, I really liked when you were saying that earlier. It's like sometimes I am trying to solve the problem at 2 a.m. And I'm just able to like calmly put my hand on my heart with warmth to say, Lydia, you're not in the space to figure this out right now.
It's not your job right now.
It's not my job right now. But then my brain starts up again, right? It goes down that trail. And I think that is normal. And to figure out when it's happening, because sometimes I get into like, I'm just going, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious right now. To be able to stop.
Is that the voice that actually happens?
What is happening? That's my internal monologue. Do you not have an internal monologue?
Mine doesn't really sound like Shrek.
What?
But I love getting to know your internal monologue.
Thank you so much. I don't even know what you threw me off my groove here. I don't know.
Being able to recognize that you have an internal monologue going on, being able to go like, okay, wait, this is taking over. Like, this is not what I need to listen to.
Yes. Sometimes when I get like through in the busyness of it all and I'm not in touch with myself, I have this like, I'm anxious right now. And I think the recognition that I'm anxious is some of the hardest work to do.
Yes.
And so I would say if you're sitting at home and you're listening to this, you're driving, you're on your run, I don't know what you're doing while you're doing this podcast, or you're listening to this podcast, but I think if you're wanting to know where your anxiety is pay attention. Pay attention. Learn yourself and your cues. Like that's why I asked you that at the beginning. How did you know? And I know some of my cues when I start to get anxious. And then I can employ some of the mechanisms that I have to keep that anxiety in check.
Yep.
And not ruining my entire life, running me into the ground.
Isn't that what the concept is? It interoception, right? Being able to stay in touch. So we can do it with hunger, which is, I'm recognizing that my belly is making noises or it's feeling a little gurgly or that's the technical term, obviously. And now I can choose what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to choose whether I ignore it because I know I'm going to eat in 30 minutes or if I'm going to get something to drink or if I'm going to get myself a snack, right? It's the same thing with feelings, right? Let me recognize what's going on and then choose what I want to do about it.
Yeah. So what things could people do about it?
Wow. Well, we've already identified we don't want to ignore it.
Don't ignore it. Validate it.
Already like know, hey, it's normal to have anxiety. And so even those first things that say like your feelings make sense, this is normal, it's okay, is our starting place. But yes, so follow like that train down. That mindfulness thing, remember the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can
smell.
Yes, 1 thing you can taste.
Yeah.
That one, as kind of cheesy as it is, what does it do? It brings you back into the moment and brings you an awareness of your body, right? Yeah. It doesn't make the anxiety go away. It helps you to feel a little bit more in control of it.
Yeah, these like weird, kind of cheesy mindfulness techniques. Oh, box breathing, whatever. You know, I didn't think that box breathing worked until I was doing it. And then it works when you actually do it. The amount of times I told my clients, you know, you tell your clients things, but then you got to do them. Or at least I like to. The amount of times I'm like, breathing works. You got to breathe. And then I started breathing and I was like, oh, this actually works. There's a reason why people breathing is associated with so many anxiety managing techniques.
Yep.
And it's linked with, like, you can manage anger with it. You can manage all kinds of feelings with breathing. I have my own feelings about what I'm saying right now. I used to be like, don't tell me to breathe. But, now I'm like, yeah, breathing, it works.
I heard once that when we are in the middle of like kind of freaking out, which ultimately is us going, I can't handle it, I'm not going to make it, we forget to breathe, which is the one thing that we can do to help keep us alive and keep us going. And that was so helpful to go back to. Breathing is so much more than like I am helping myself stay alive in this moment. Like, I am helping my body to work the way that it's supposed to. Breathing is actually crazy powerful.
I know. When you actually look into the science of all of it, which we can't even get into in this podcast. Okay, we'll have to do another episode on, like, just breathing.
I may need to study up on the science of it before we do that. All I know is it's crazy cool how our body works. Yes.
Well, I think ultimately the spiel that I give is... breathing is something we can control. It's an automatic process, but it's also something we can control. And it cues to our body that we aren't freaking out right now.
Yes.
That we are okay. So if we can give ourselves some deep breaths, that tells all the rest of our systems, hey, we don't have to freak out right now. Like, we have enough time to breathe. Because when we're in that fight or flight, freeze, fawn, whatever, situation, those fear responses, fear and anxiety, our breathing tends to get, very shallow and short. And so if we can take those long, deep belly breaths, it's cueing all the rest of our systems to slow down.
Yep. Breathing's a good one.
Breathing's a good one.
For the other quick ones, and again, we start, like, at the beginning, I said, like, what are my quick ways to do it? And I call those Band-Aids, which is in the moment, you need something that's going to help to stop the bleeding, right? Your body still needs to heal from whatever the cut is, but we need something in that moment to help a little bit. Music's awesome, right? And I think it's Bruce Perry who talks about rhythmic, relational, repetitive is a great way to regulate yourself. And so what is music? Like, rhythmic, it's repetitive. And usually if it has words, there's some kind of component that you can relate to in it, right? So you're doing that and you honestly start to like sway a little bit or just start to go back and forth so that your body's getting engaged in the rhythm of it is going to ultimately help you to feel more in control and regulated. Because again, regulated means, hey, I'm back to my normal, right? I'm not too much, I'm not too little, I'm just right, which sounds like the Three Bears. Wow, that totally sounded like the Three Bears right there.
We want Goldilocks level anxiety. Not too much, not too little, just enough.
Right.
Just right. And then we can start to employ some of those, I think, higher cognition type strategies where we're starting to rewire. Is after we're regulated, where we're just right. Yeah. Okay, so we have our like little Band-Aid skills that can bring us back to, I would say, the present. Yeah. Most of the skills that I use, just like you were saying, is really about the client and what helps them get back to the present.
Yes.
So maybe they listen to music and they let their mind drift, and that's not good. But when they put their feet into the ground and they push, that actually helps them feel more in their body and present. Yeah. What other techniques do you use?
Are we talking about Band-Aids?
You can talk about whatever you want.
Yes.
Maybe once you get past the Band-Aids. Let's get past the Band-Aids.
So Band-Aids are truly about, like, can I get back to my body, right? Like, I'm stuck in my head, I'm spinning, or I'm stuck in the future. Like, how do I get back to the right now and recognize I am still here and I'm okay in this moment?
Yeah.
How do we get to the root of it? I'm a huge fan of counseling.
I'm really a big fan of counseling, too.
But counseling is to have a space where you're not getting judged. To say, hey, I'm feeling anxious, and these are the thoughts that are going through my head, and this is the negative stuff that I'm thinking about myself and the world, and it's okay to name those things without the fear of truly somebody judging you and everything in your world changing. Hopefully that's your experience.
Totally.
Yes.
Had a session like last week where somebody was like these are the quote unquote crazy things that are happening in my head. And at the end of session, being able to leave, and they were like, we didn't even fix anything. And I feel so much better because we were able to hold space here for the lyrics of Defying Gravity. And
you gotta work wicked
I
into
can never
things
say
now.
holding space ever again.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone. I can't say it anymore without thinking of Defying Gravity. Never. There's nothing else to say. We are holding space for those anxious thoughts that can actually sound cuckoo bananas. They can sound wild. You thinking that you're going to be homeless, that thought, right? When we trace all that thought all the way there, it is cuckoo bananas. Mm-hmm. And being able to say it out loud to a person who's not going to judge you frees you from believing that.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to hold on to it and the fear of it, right? It's out. We've named it. And ultimately, we have some control over whether it happens or not when we are able to stop and look at it. Because often we have more control than we think we do. Mm-hmm. I was with a client earlier this week who made that comment. She was in a situation that was just really challenging. And in it, she went, oh, I have more control than I thought I would have. And for her, it was so freeing just to realize this doesn't have an out of control piece. This isn't completely helpless. There are little ways that I can keep myself feeling safe or to take care of myself or even just to survive. Mm-hmm. But I have more choice right now. And that is so powerful in managing anxiety.
Yeah. We haven't even gotten into control.
Oh my goodness.
But I think that's another driver of anxiety is feeling out of control.
Right. Like we either avoid the thing that is triggering the anxiety or we try to control the thing that's triggering it, which either way it's an extreme as opposed to becoming friends.
Sometimes I don't want to.
Well, absolutely. Right.
Yeah, because that thought is like wild. Why would I want to become friends with that thought?
Right.
Right?
I don't like it. It feels gross and yucky. Ew. It's embarrassing. I don't want to like talk about it or have it be more real. If I talk about it and I think about it, then there's more of a chance it will be true, right? That's the anxiety that is spinning.
Yeah. I'm relating to all that there.
Anxiety about anxiety, right?
The anxiety about anxiety. You're totally right. Yeah.
So what do you think? Like, how do we, with our clients, help to move from a place of anxiety has been such a part of my world to the experience of it not being as much? And I think the stuck place that I see a lot is this feels weird to not be anxious. I am so used to that being a protective piece that shows up or just part of who I am. It now feels weird. And I kind of want to go back to that because that was comfortable. I don't really trust that this new feeling is going to stick around.
Yeah. So slowing down and then trusting that it's okay to be slow. I think part of the rewiring process is, I think I relate here, and I think a lot of clients do and people do, is getting really comfortable, especially in the busyness, that when I slow down, that's when my anxiety goes higher because I need to be busier. I need to be on it. I'm missing something. I can't be just sitting here. I need to be on. And getting comfortable with relaxing and being present oriented.
Right? It feels strange.
Yeah. Giving yourself more and more experiences of being relaxed and that being okay. Yeah. And I think it is clearing time and space for connecting in with other people and being okay, just relaxing. Whether that is listening to music, and that could be watching a movie. That's okay. Screens can be included. Technology can be included. But I think when people are like watching TV, then they're scrolling on their phone and they're looking at their laptop on, their emails on their laptop.
You're not describing me and what I did last night at all.
I think that's just not relaxing.
I think I would agree. Probably not the most relaxing choice.
Yeah, I've done that too, where I'm like half relaxing though.
Because I'm sitting here and there's something relaxing on TV.
There is something relaxing. I'm sitting on the couch. That's half the battle.
Right. So you're gaslighting yourself. You're CBTing yourself in that moment.
Yeah, I think just actually giving yourself the ups and downs of being on and being off. And that could be turning off your phone.
Yeah.
I think, I need to do more of that, is getting off my phone. Although my child won't even let me be on my phone. So
Well, that's helpful right now.
it helps me be present oriented with her, for sure. For sure.
When I talked about the 2-year-old that was demanding, it's the real life kid
I was about to
that's
say,
demanding.
that is relatable. I don't get to ignore her.
No, which is probably good right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Except when you're only getting 4 hours of sleep.
Ugh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll ask the question back to you. How do we get comfortable with the new normal?
Remember how we kind of started with, I don't trust future self to be able to handle it, right? Same kind of thing. Is your future self going to be able to handle a change of emotion, right? Because if anxiety comes back, can future self manage it differently than your past self did? That's a tricky one to believe, but that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Is the anxiety of having a new experience is all that same piece of, I don't trust future self in case anxiety comes back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like part of the long-term work of managing anxiety is developing more self-trust.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. And I don't know how much that comes with, like, look at my positive affirmations and I'm saying these things. It comes through doing something that's really brave, which usually means, wow, I'm going to show up authentically with people. And instead of going, everything's great, it's wonderful, or, oh my goodness, it's awful. You know what? Let me stop and think about how I'm doing. Yeah, today's been kind of a tough day, but I'm figuring it out. Or, wow, you know what? It was a little lonely over Thanksgiving break because people were kind of busy and I found myself a little more sad than usual. Like, you don't need to trauma dump kind of thing, but to show up a little bit more authentically with somebody opens the door for connection, which ultimately says, like, oh, I'm not perfect, things aren't okay, and you still accept me, which takes care of that worst case scenario that often shows up as to why we're trying to control or overthink things. But that's being brave, right? We're brave.
That is being brave.
And now hopefully we've got some rewiring happening that you go, I did it. I did something a little scary and I made it through. And your brain can hold on to that for the next time that we do something a little bit brave and a little scary.
Right. That's like now building that evidence base. It's like, I can face something. And we know that anxiety is usually before the event. So let's just think of Christmas Day with a family.
Yes.
Right? And Auntie Sue is going to drink too much. And, my dad's going to say this. And maybe you are going through some of the scenarios to prepare. That's what anxiety helps you do, is to feel prepared. It doesn't always do a great job of it. But it likes to come up with, what if they do this and this, and I've got to be prepared for all these scenarios. My best tip, and I use this.
I'm ready.
Not to drop this, like, basically at the end of the podcast. My best tip is, I'll say to myself, if that happens, I give myself permission to freak out. I will freak.
Like if the lion shows up. Yes.
If the lion shows up, if that worst case scenario happens, I will give myself permission to freak out. Until that moment, I'll hold off.
Ooh.
I'll just press pause and I'll wait for more information. It's my best tip. When my clients actually use that, right, they'll come back and say, hey, I listened to your advice and that was really good advice. It's my favorite thing that they say. But this one really gets people. So you can take it.
I'm going to, because my best tip is you can always go to the bathroom, right? No matter what situation you're in, it's okay to be like, I got to go pee. Because you can go into a room by yourself.
Yep.
You can change how your body is, right? You can sit down, you can stand up, you can whatever. You can get cold water on your hands. Like, you got a lot of options. And it's very rare that somebody's going to say, like, no, you can't go to the bathroom. So you always have a way to take a break. Yours, a little bit more brilliant. I might be taking yours instead.
Listen, you can combo that. Go to the bathroom, take some deep breaths,
freak out if you need to,
because that worst case scenario has happened. But that's okay.
Yep.
You're freaking out.
That was your plan, so great.
That's the plan. Do it in the bathroom.
Yep. It's true, though. When people actually put things into practice, and I say this with all the love, usually therapists are trying to give helpful feedback. They're trying to give directions that say, hey, maybe try this because I know you. And so knowing you and the things we've talked about, I think this will work. When people take that brave step to try it and it works, that empowering feeling that they get, like that's the piece that I love as a clinician, is when they come back and say, I did it. I did this thing. I tried it and it worked and I made it through and I had a different experience and I feel so good. Love that moment.
I knew you could. I knew you could.
I believed in your future self.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes that's what it takes, is having another person who believes in you and believes in your power to change your circumstances and change your emotional state. And giving you the options that you don't see. Like going to the bathroom, freaking out.
Yes. Hey, one thing we were going to talk about was medication, because that's an option when anxiety becomes really, really big.
Yeah.
And I'm not the person who's going to push that, right? It's one of those things where you go, I've tried all these things and I feel like I'm still getting stuck. I'm working really hard to manage it and it's still getting in the way of me getting to show up and be present in my life. I would say, like, go talk to somebody about it. Just because you go and you talk about medication doesn't mean that you need medication. It means that you are getting information for yourself to make a decision truly of what you're going to do. There's not a blanket answer for everybody. There's a lot of options, but that's probably the thing I hear the most is, I don't want to go start the conversation because that's going to mean I'm going to be on medication. Starting the conversation means you're getting information. And like we've been talking about this whole time, if you name the fear and you put it out there and say, these are the thoughts that I'm having, and this is my worst case scenario and all of that about medication, you have somebody say, yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
A lot of people have thought that. A lot of people have had the thought of, if I take medication, that means there's something wrong with me, or I have to do this for the rest of my life, or I'm going to become addicted to it. I mean, all of those things are things that I hear. So let's talk about it and get some real facts. If we go back to CBT, let's find the things that are true.
Right.
And then make an informed decision about whether that's going to be beneficial for you or your kid or whoever it is that needs it.
How does medication help with anxiety?
There's a lot of different ways. The main forms of medication are SSRIs, and so selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which ultimately makes serotonin, which is our feel-good neurotransmitter, more accessible. If we get a little bit more serotonin, we get a little bit more of that feel-good feeling, which hopefully brings the intensity of the anxiety down and makes it more manageable. So it doesn't turn it off. So our amygdala is really good at helping go, there's a threat. It doesn't turn it off. It hopefully kind of dims it down so that all of those other places of, can I stop and think? Is this rational? Hey, I'm not in the space for this right now. It's not my job. All of those things can be more accessed instead of feeling that constant state of anxiety.
Yeah. I'm not a medication provider, but some of my clients really could use medication. And just based off of the tools that we're working on aren't working anymore. Yeah. That's how we know. It's like we're trying and trying and trying. And what I say is to be on medication is to take this giant and shrink it down into something you could beat. And we don't want it to go away. We don't want you to be numb. Right. We want you to beat it. We want you to train up in order to defeat it.
I love your metaphors or analogies or whatever the right name for it is. I love it because you make it into something that's understandable for someone. My medication analogy is like chocolate, right? Some people are wired to like dark chocolate. They like white chocolate. They like milk chocolate. And so sometimes we try a medication and it's just not the right one for you. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's just that you're wired for dark chocolate instead of milk chocolate. So we have to make some changes until we find the one that's the right fit. Yeah. That's my only good one. I like your giant one better.
That can be a really hard process.
It can.
So is it okay if I wrap up?
Absolutely. I think we've covered like what is anxiety and that it's okay to have it and that it doesn't need to be the thing that controls everything. But for a lot of people it is. And there's tools out there and there's hope. And watch Inside Out and Wicked apparently is the summation of this time.
Well, that's the question I was going to ask you, but I think you've summed it up, given us all the high points of the episode. If you do love this episode, please give us a like, a subscribe, rate us 5 stars. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Counselor Off the Clock. You can find Arcadian Therapeutic Services
Arcadiantherapy.com.
at arcadiantherapy.com. That'll be in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yes.
And facing your anxiety. And luckily, I don't think you're going to be homeless after this podcast.
I really hope not. If we get enough likes, that should help, right?
Yeah, give us those likes. It'll help Amy, not me.
Yes. This is actually a lot more fun than I was expecting. So,
I'm so glad.
end of it, wow, anxiety was a little bit out of control, but it turned out to be just enough to make me prepared and excited. And now I can say goodbye to it because it doesn't need to be around anymore.
We can let it go. Like Frozen.
Oh, great. Add one more movie in there.
Movie.
Great.
All right. I hope you got comfortable. Forgot almost to say the tagline. Because we are off the clock.
Love it.